In the political arena, a lot's been going on, including an about turn on a clause in the Three Waters bill. We caught up with the Prime Minister earlier this morning and asked if the government was any closer to finding out how the mistake was made with a 60% threshold vote instead of the 75% over the controversial entrenchment of public ownership of water assets.
Just to give a bit of context, on the issue itself, we stand very firm on. We don't want to see our water assets privatised or sold. We want those to stay in public ownership. So the Green Party put forward an amendment to try and what they call entrench public ownership. And what that means is setting a higher bar than just a majority. So you'd have to have a large number of people vote in favour in order to be able to privatise. Usually that sits at 75%. They created a threshold in their SOP that was 60% and put that before Parliament. It passed. What we've subsequently said is, whilst we absolutely stand by the issue of not wanting to ever see our water assets privatised, when you use entrenchment clauses, we do need to be careful about when they're used. This was quite novel. Our view was it was a mistake to use that kind of approach. We've subsequently fixed it, Neil. We've pulled it out. And now as a Parliament, we've suggested that all MPs go away and actually work through when do we use clauses like that, given that they should be really, really used.
Now, Broadcasting Minister Willie Jackson has apologised for his interview over the weekend. We know you're not always going to get things right, but this only provides more ammo sometimes for the opposition. How do you feel about the minister's comments?
Yeah. So look, he's said that, look, there were things that he said there in that interview, and that obviously on reflection he said that he's taken a different view and he's apologised for the interview, and I accept that. And what we come back to is what was the subject matter in itself. There were two things actually. One was this issue of how do we deal with the fact that social media companies are using the work of media, news stories, news articles, that of course it costs them money to produce, and replicating them without any compensation going to those media companies. So we're trying to fix that problem. The second issue that got discussed was the issue of the future of Radio New Zealand and TVNZ, our public broadcasters. How do we make sure that they are well supported? Those are both important issues, and he wouldn't want to see an interview detract from that.
Now, looking at another topic, Dame Potasi's review detailing a litany of failures by multiple agencies over the lack of care and protection of 5-year-old Malachi Sue Bates, who was murdered by his caregiver last year, was released last week. We've reached out to Kelvin Davis, but he wasn't available. He has said he's not committed to all of the report's recommendations. Yeah. Do you think this is the best way forward?
Yeah, so really useful to always have someone independently come in and assess what has happened in something that is so devastating as the loss of a child's life. So we've got a number of different reviews happening to see what has happened in this case and what we need to learn from that. Dame Karen has come out with 14 recommendations. We've fully accepted 9, but carefully looking at the remaining 5. So to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the ones that we've said, look, we just want to spend a bit more time on them. You remember in this case, we had a young child that was, because the parent was placed, a sole parent was placed in corrections, with corrections. Then the child was placed with another caregiver, and the parent made that decision before they went into prison. So one of the things that has been recommended is whether or not Oranga Tamariki should be involved with the decision over the placement of children who are otherwise with sole parents if they go into prison. Now that's a big call around that. So those are the kinds of things we just think needs to be worked through and given a bit more time.
So why not mandatory reporting? Should this not be a priority for government departments?
A really good question. Mandatory reporting has been on in the 15 years I've been in Parliament. Mandatory reporting has been debated at least once, and it sounds simple. It sounds like a good thing to do. You know, if you suspect child abuse, report. One thing I would say is that most of our agencies already have a form of practice around what to do when they suspect child abuse. So there are already in place measures. The one concern that is often put up is if you have mandatory reporting, whether or not that means that you will see people stop presenting, whether you stop seeing healthcare provision being used, whether you have an unintended consequence through mandatory reporting. So those are some of the issues. But again, it's one of the ones we say, let's just not rush. Let's have that discussion. Let's talk about whether or not that's the right move.
Yeah, I guess it just didn't happen in this case. Do you know why?
Well, in this case, you saw that there was some reporting, but it went in the wrong direction. The right people weren't told. And so that's one of the issues that's come through with the education provider, and there's been ramifications for that. So there's a number of things. I think one of the easiest ways to describe it here, Neil, is what has happened is you've got a number of people with different pieces of the puzzle, not enough people coming together to complete the picture, and the consequence is devastating.
Prime Minister, turning now to the Royal Commission inquiry into our COVID-19 response, what outcomes are you expecting or hoping for from the investigation, and is now the right time to be spending money on a review considering the current financial situation that we find ourselves in?
Look, a good question. The reason we've waited till this period is because now that we no longer have things like the traffic light system, and we're not in a constant cycle from the public's perspective of managing settings, it gives us a bit more bandwidth to go back and say, given that we've had this recent experience of a pandemic, let's not lose the lessons. There'll be things that we did right, and there'll be things that we chose where we didn't have full information, and actually there might have been better options. We will have a pandemic again in the future. We all hope it won't be at the scale of what we've just experienced, but let's not lose the lessons so that we don't repeat any mistakes.
Now, a new poll has national candidate Tama Potaka favoured to win the Hamilton West by-election this weekend. Are you concerned at all that this result could somehow indicate the country's political appetite for change?
As I've said about Hamilton West, I mean, in 2017, when we formed government, so when we were able to, when we succeeded in that election, we actually lost Hamilton West, and I think the margin was something like 20 points. So Hamilton West isn't always a seat that indicates which way government is going to go, particularly in MMP. And by-elections are also quite difficult to read into because of turnout. My one request would be, if you live in Hamilton West, please just go and vote. The turnout at the moment, voting has started, Neil. It's quite low, and it would be very difficult to read anything into that outcome if the turnout is very low.
Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, thank you for joining us today. This is our last catch-up of the year.
Meri kirihi mete.
Meri kirihi mete, and have a wonderful and safe new year. Look forward to catching up with you again in 2023.
Ka kite.